Now we will be talking about dynamics of ecosystem. Before talking in details the different aspects of ecosystem, we are supposed to tell like this. That is, in dynamics of ecosystem only we will talk all rest of the topics. Now whatever the foregoing knowledge we have talked about, the before said topic or before said information will only give the idea about the gross structure of an ecosystem. We will not get the detailed structure and understanding about the living and non-living components, the function and nature of ecosystem. So in order to know the basic nature and function of a particular ecosystem, we are supposed to study the different components of ecosystem in a detail. We are different components of nature. So what are those? The functions of an ecosystem can be the functions. In this we will study about the functions of ecosystem. Right, in ecosystem functions we will be studying different concepts, like includes nearly 6 headings or 6 topics. First one will be the trophic levels. Next will be the food chain. We will talk in detail about all this. Next will be food web. Next will be, you will be having a study about ecological pyramids. And we will be talking about the energy flow. And we will be talking about biogeochemical cycles. So under dynamics of ecosystem, in detail we will be studying the functions of an ecosystem. In functions of an ecosystem we will be dealing in detail the different aspects of an ecosystem. Those are trophic levels, food chains, food webs, ecological pyramids, and energy flow and biogeochemical cycle in detail. So you have a chance of getting more number of questions from each aspect here. At least 4 to 5 to 6 questions, multiple choice questions are possible in each aspect here. Okay. Now we will start taking one by one. In trophic level, we can say all the organisms which are having similar feeding habit are grouped under one section or one trophic level. So all the organisms with similar food habits are grouped together, and that's grouping of organism based on the similar food habit is called as the trophic levels. For example, there are different types of trophic levels. Trophic level is represented by the letter T, capital T. Okay. Now this T, each level we will be nominating one number, T1, T2, T3 or T4. Okay. Now in T1, all the autotrophic organisms which can prepare the food material. As we said, there are autotrophs, right, in an ecosystem. So all the autotrophic organisms which are having the ability to produce the food materials are present. Those are also called as producers. Right, the trophic level T1 is nothing but a component which is consisting of all the producers. Producers are otherwise also called as autotrophs. What are autotrophs? Autotrophs are those animals which have the ability to trap the radiant solar energy and convert it into potential chemical energy to fulfill their food requirement. Right. Next we will have, second one is called as herbivores. Now what are herbivores? Animals which are depending directly on the plants for the food material are called as herbivorous animals. So that will be occupying the second base of the trophic level. Those are called as the herbivores or trophic level 2 or T2 level. Next one, animal depending on the herbivores. Another third level is called as the carnivores. Carnivores. So what is carnivores? The animals which are depending upon the herbivores for the food material are called as carnivores. It will be occupying the place third position in the trophic level. That's why we call it as third trophic level or T3 position. Next, in T3 position you will be having 2 to 3 layers of carnivores depending upon that level of absorption. Now here after that there will be another layer called as T4 layer. Those are called as top carnivores, and these are also called as predators. Now what are predators or carnivores or top carnivores? Carnivores are those animals which depend on herbivores for the food materials. Again, in this carnivores there are 2 to 3 layers of carnivores in between. So those are called as predators. right? Next to the predators you have top carnivores, and top carnivores are also those layers which are dependent on all the above three levels, herbivores and carnivores, for the food material, which are not further eaten or killed by any other organism. They occupy the topmost position in the trophic level. These are decomposer forms. This occupy the fourth position. These are called as T4, or we can also see T5 position here, and these will include top carnivores will include all the decomposers, and this will be the ultimate decomposers which are helpful and which are not further eaten by any other organism. So basically all the organisms with the similar feeding habit are categorized in one particular level. Those are called as trophic level. It is represented by a letter T. So on the basis of the preparation of food material or dependency on other organism for the food material, they are categorized into T1 to T5 or T4 levels. So T1 is the base of the trophic level. It is also called as producers or autotrophs, those organisms which have the ability to prepare the food material. T2 herbivores, the green plants which prepare food material. Carnivores, the animals, animals which depend on plants for food material, herbivores. Carnivores which eat the herbivores for the food material. In between T3 there are 2 to 3 levels of carnivores which are ultimately called, all of them are called as predators. Next to them we will come across a term called as the carnivores which are not eaten by any other carnivores or any other animals further are called as top carnivores. T5th, ultimately decomposers are present, which are also one of the trophic levels of the energy pyramid, okay, at the trophic level. So this is about trophic levels. Now here we can write about like producers, consumers. Now in consumers you will be also talking about, this can be written like this: producers, herbivores, consumers. No, in consumers you can write here like you will have primary consumers, consumer like you will have secondary consumers, you will have tertiary consumers, and at the end you will have carnivores. Like it will be T1, T2, T3 level, and all this will be T4 or T5 level. Right, in this T3 level you will be seeing the presence of primary consumers, secondary consumer and tertiary consumers. Okay, so these are different trophic levels which are present in ecosystem or in energy transfer or in any ecological pyramid you will see. Okay, next topic in the functions of ecosystem, as I said earlier, you will be having is food chain. Okay, now what is food chain? As we studied in the first class, food chain is nothing but the flow of food energy from producers to the top carnivores, from one trophic level to the another level. So in an ecosystem, producers and different types of consumers are arranged in a linear sequence on the basis of the food habits in which they are occurring. Now here the energy rich food material passes from producers, like for example, if it is a pyramid, you will have producers, some consumer levels, consumers and decomposers or top carnivores. Okay, now what is food chain? The energy rich food material which is passing from producers to consumers, next to decomposers, like from autotrophic producers to consumers. Primary, in the consumers, as we said earlier, there are three types: primary consumer, secondary consumer and tertiary consumer, and again from there it will go on to the top carnivores and so decomposers and so on. So this energy flow or energy rich food material, the transfer of food energy from producers through a series of organisms with repeated process of being eating and being eaten is called as food chain. The process of eating and being eaten is food chain, is known as food chain. Means during the transfer of energy rich food material from one trophic level to the another trophic level with a process, continuous process of being eating and being eaten. What does it mean, eating and being eaten? produces autotrophs. It will eat some material, means it takes solar energy, prepare food material. When it comes to consumers, consumers eats, producers, right? So eating and being eaten by other organisms, and they, in the same process it will be simultaneously the transfer of energy, food energy will be occurring. So this process is called as the food chain. Now in case of grassland ecosystem, if it is a grassland ecosystem, in grassland ecosystem, what are the possibilities of food chain here? In grassland ecosystem, in which the grass are eaten by, for example, the grass is eaten by grasshopper, right? In for example, if you take an example of grassland ecosystem in food chain, grass is eaten by grasshopper, grasshopper is eaten by frog, right? Frog is eaten by snake, snake is eaten by hawk, right? Means the process of eating and being eaten, eating and being eaten, and the flow of energy, food energy is occurring from one trophic level to the another trophic level. So in the case of, next in case of freshwater ecosystem, similarly in the case of freshwater ecosystem. So what are the components in freshwater ecosystem? What you will see? You will see some algae, right? Presence of algae will be there. You will see presence of water fleas, and this will be eaten by smaller fish, and this smaller fish are eaten by bigger fishes, and this will be eaten by birds, and birds will be eaten by large animals, and again large animals are not further eaten. So this is also considered as a food chain. In freshwater ecosystem also, in water you will see some algae, algae will be eaten by some water fleas, these water fleas will be eaten by smaller fish, this smaller fish is eaten by bigger fish, bigger fishes are eaten by birds, and ultimately this bird is eaten by large animals, right? So see here, when you see here the process of eating and being eaten, eating and being eaten by the larger animal, okay, that process is called as food chain. Hope you get this. These examples may be coming for your multiple choice, right? Now next one is, food chains are of two types here. There are two types of food chains here, of which the first one is grazing food chain, right? Now what is grazing food chain? This grazing food chain start with the green plants, it will go to grazing animals which graze the food material, and next it will go to the grazing carnivorous. Now here this type of ecosystem is totally dependent on the influx of solar radiation. Influx of solar radiation. Now most of the ecosystem in the nature are useful for the flow of transfer of energy here. Now grazing food chain is of two types, again it is of two types. So what are those two types here? First one will be terrestrial grazing food chain, and another one will be aquatic food chain. Now first we will talk about terrestrial grazing food chain. Here there are some examples I'll write down, and with which you can easily understand what is what. Okay. Now in grazing or terrestrial food chain, as the name itself indicates, if the grazing food chain is operating on the land, then it is called as grazing food chain. Okay. If the grazing food chain is operating on the land, then it is called as terrestrial grazing food chain. Now here it is called as terrestrial grazing food chain. Now examples for this are, you can call as grass plants. The example for this will be grass plants, rabbits. Grass plants will be eaten by rabbits. Rabbit will be eaten by fox. Next fox will be eaten by wolf. Next wolf will be eaten by tiger. So any grazing food chain which is occurring on the land is called as grazing food chain. In another example is green plants. Okay, this will be eaten, green plants will be eaten by insects. So insects will be eaten by frogs. Now these frogs, or you can also call it as toads, larval form will eat all this. Now these frogs or toads will be eaten by snake, and again this snake may also be eaten by peacock. Right? Hope you get this. Terrestrial grazing food chain is a chain if it is occurring on the land. It is occurring on land, it is called as terrestrial. Now examples, with this example you will understand, no need of definition here. Grass plants, or you can also call as green plants, and another one we can take is green plant. You can take green plants are eaten by squirrels. Squirrels are eaten by wild cats, and wild cats are eaten by the larger animal, that is tiger. Right? So this grass plants are eaten by rabbit, rabbit is eaten by fox, fox is eaten by wolf, wolf is eaten by tiger. Similarly, if there are some green plants, these are eaten by insects, insects are eaten by frogs or the toads, that is eaten by snakes, snake is eaten by peacock. Okay. Next, one more example, green plants are eaten by squirrels, squirrels are eaten by wild cats, and wild cats are eaten by tiger. So this is about terrestrial grazing food chain. Now we will talk about aquatic grazing food chain. Now, aquatic food chains. Now, in aquatic food chain, what is there? The food chain which is operating in the water, the food chain which is operating in the water is called as aquatic food chain. So what components you will see in the food chain, aquatic food chain? You will see about phytoplanktons. Okay, you can see phytoplanktons, right? That can be called as producers or base. These are eaten by zooplanktons, right? And again these are eaten by small fish, right? Now these small fishes will be eaten by, and these large fishes will ultimately be eaten by birds. So basically it is a cyclic process of eating and being eaten, though it is a terrestrial grazing food chain or aquatic food chain. So in aquatic food chain you have phytoplanktons eaten by zooplanktons, which are in turn eaten by small fishes, which are eaten by large fishes, and those are eaten by the food. Now in case of another one we have is parasitic food chain. So what is parasitic food chain here? Parasitic food chain is a type of food chain which starts from larger animals and ends with smaller organisms. Which starts with larger animals and ends with, it will start with L to S, means it's the process of food chain starts with larger animals and ends with smaller animals. This the food chain can be in the form of, inverted pyramid. The food chain, normally these are normal pyramids in a triangle form. These aquatic and terrestrial food chains are in the form of smaller to larger, right? Whereas parasitic food chain will be an inverted pyramid, it will be like this. Okay, so this will be occupying from larger to smaller organisms. Larger to smaller organisms. Examples for this will be tree. Trees will be eaten by insects or birds, right? Now next, birds will be eaten after death, that will be eaten by parasites, right? Now these parasites will be eaten by hyperparasites, right? Now these hyperparasites are nothing but all the bacteria and fungi. Okay, parasitic food chain is an inverted pyramid. It starts with larger animals and ends with the smaller animal. And here we will see an example of tree. It is eaten by insects or birds, and these are in turn eaten by, after death they are eaten by parasites. These parasites are still eaten by hyperparasites. Okay, another type of food chain is detritus food chain. Okay. Now what is detritus food chain? Those are, what is actually detritus? What is detritus? Detritus, like it goes from dead organic matter can be called as detritus. It is can be called as dead organic matter. Dead organic matter is called as detritus. So any food chain which goes from dead organic matter to microorganisms and from there to macroorganisms. Right. So this sort of chain is called as detritus food chain. So first they are starting from dead organic matter, that is being converted to that detritus organic matter into microorganisms and then into macroorganisms. This form, so this type of food chain form a link between the dead organic matter and the living matter. So here this type of food chain or this type of ecosystem of dead organic matter is not are less dependent, we can say is not, or we can say it is less dependent on the solar energy. It is less dependent on solar energy. And this type of food chain is more important. Where do you see this type of food chain? You see this type of food chain, for example, in estuaries, estuarine and coastal region and coastal ecosystems. This is important. What is detritus food chain? A food chain which starts from dead organic matter, then to micro, then to the macroorganisms. Food chain which is interlinked between the dead organic matter and the living matter and which is less dependent on solar energy is called detritus food chain. And examples, so these are mostly seen in estuarine and coastal. These are less mostly seen in estuarine and coastal ecosystem. We have discussed earlier is food chain, right? Now we will talk about food web. Before talking to food web, we can say about like when we are talking in natural condition, a food chain, what we said, the process of eating and being eaten, right? Now in natural condition, we cannot say that food chain is occurring in an isolated form. Means it is not an individual activity. It is in response to group of organisms or group of trophic levels which are involved. It is a communication of different organisms involved, so that will lead to a formation of food chain. It cannot occur in an isolated form. Now here when we are talking in terms of food chains are all these food chains will occur in the form of from one trophic level to another trophic level. As I said, one trophic level to another trophic level, and in each trophic level when the process of eating and being eaten is undergoing, there is some sort of energy being lost. So when we are talking energy flow, we will talk about that energy. Now when we come to the food web, now what is food and a web? Web means a group, a web like structure, right? Now in food chain, all the food chain, different food chains, we have studied about aquatic food chain, grazing food chain, terrestrial food chain, detritus food chains, right? Like this, all the interlocking pattern or all the food chains when they are interconnected with each other and they form a net like fashion. So all the food chains connected to each other, they form a net like fashion or web like fashion, that is called as food web, right? The interlocking pattern of food chain, the interlocking pattern of food chain is called as food web. Now when we are coming to the food web, for example, this is the definition of food web. So basically food web is nothing but the interconnection or interlocking pattern in between the different food chains which will appear in the form of web is called as the food web. Now for example, in producers ecosystem, we will see that there are three different layers. I said you can have producer in an ecosystem, tropical ecosystem, producers, consumers and decomposers, I said, right? Now when the food chain is occurring or when the food is being transferred, unlike the food chain, this food web will take or make use of different sources or different ways of getting the food material, right? Now the food chain, the food which is produced at the producers is being transferred to consumers next to the decomposer. Means the food chain, the energy is being transferred from one trophic level to the another trophic level, and in the process of being eaten and it will take in the involvement of it will make use or it will involve number of other organisms and number of trophic levels involved in it during the process of time. In food web also it will make use of more than one food chain, it will make use of more than one trophic levels, it will make into use of number of organisms, different organisms are involved. So a club together of 2 to 3 food chain together which will form a web like fashion is called as food web. Okay. Now for example, we will take in a grassland ecosystem. In grassland ecosystem also, if you take an example of lizard, okay, when there is a lizard, if there is a sudden decrease in the population of lizard, what will happen? If lizards are dead, then there will be a population, more population of insects, and this population of insects will lead to the population of pests, and this will be disturbing the crop of a particular plant, right? So decrease in one population may lead to the fluctuations of the remaining levels of a ecosystem, right? For example, lizard, if there is no lizard, there will be more insects will lead to the insect pests on grasses, and that grasses will affect the fertility of the crop ecosystem, right? So this will example. In the similar sense, if you take the snakes will keep a check on the rodents. So if there is no snakes, there will be more number of rodents. So for the main idea behind telling this is, okay, for in nature, every one aspect is having a natural check. A step in ecosystem will have a natural check on the growth of the other ecosystem. Now, the example of lizard and snake will keep a check on the rodents. So here, in the basic idea behind studying food web is, why we are studying food web is, it is helpful in maintaining the ecological stability on the earth. In nature, it will maintain the stability in the ecosystem. Ecological stability is maintained by food web. Now here, each species is kept under natural check, and each species, diminishing of one species will affect the other species. Now here, for example, there is a example of food web here. Grasses are there. Grasses are eaten by grasshoppers. Grasshoppers are eaten by lizard. Lizard is eaten by hawk. That is one food chain. Grass is eaten by rabbit. Rabbit is eaten by hawk. This is one food chain. Grass, mouse. Mouse can be eaten by hawk, or mouse can be eaten by snake. Snake can be eaten by hawk. So ultimately there are again here one more: grass, grasshopper, hawk. Grass, grasshopper, lizard, hawk. So there are ultimately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 food chains interlinked with each other, and this ultimately can be called as the food web of grassland ecosystem. This is an example of food web of grassland ecosystem.